Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Higher Education panel. My name is Francis Sue. I'm a professor of mathematics at Harvey College, and I have with me three other panelists who will be speaking about various perspectives on higher education. Julie Phelps from Valencia College, Gary Martin from Auburn University, and Michael Pearson from the MAA. So we're each going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions, so be thinking about questions that you might have for us to have a discussion, not necessarily just directed at the panelists, but it would be great for all of us to have a discussion about some of these issues that affect us all. So I'll just begin by saying I am a professor at Harvey Mudd, and Harvey Mudd is a science and engineering school that's also a liberal arts college, and so we have a unique sort of focus on both liberal arts and the sciences. I've been teaching there now for about 20 years. And I'm going to say a little bit about some of the work that's been going on in some of the societies, and how it affects me as a mathematician teaching at a college. One of the hats that I wore previously was as president of the Mathematical Association of America. And I also have was on the writing team for Catalyzing Change, and I learned a lot that I didn't know about what's going on in K-12 education. And so for me, this has been a really a learning process as well. And I think part of what I want to have all of us think through today, those of us who are thinking about higher education, is what are some of the ways that we can begin to increase communication with K-12, because a lot of professors, I think, like myself, maybe 10 years ago, were pretty much clueless about some of the big issues. So I want to reflect a little bit about this question, why learn mathematics? And the answer that you often hear is to be college and career ready, or trust me, you'll use it later. These are all versions of things that I think it's been traditional to say things like this when we talk about learning mathematics. And I think neither of them are really sufficient answers to the question. Of course, they are part of the answer. Yes, you do want to be ready for college and careers, but there are a lot of students out there for whom it's just not clear to them what their career is going to be. And it's not to say that trust me, you'll use it later is not necessarily going to be satisfying to somebody who's learning mathematics now. One of the things that I think is great, so let me just point out, how many people saw this op-ed? It's written by an engineering professor, and I think her point was that basically we have gone too far down the road of teaching concepts, and at some point you really just have to drill, okay? And I have a lot of problems with this piece, but I think one of the questions for me that it begs is, why is she talking about making your daughter practice math and having her thank you later? And the question that when I read it was, well, how about teaching math in ways that students will thank us now? And the analogy, of course, that she uses in this op-ed is she talks about, well, we make people practice scales in music. We make people practice drills in sports. But I think what's missing from that is just remembering that people are excited to play sports. They're excited to play music because they are getting a taste of something beautiful about those endeavors now. In Catalyzing Change, the purposes of mathematics are explicitly discussed, and in addition to expand professional opportunities, which is being ready for college and careers, there are two other things that are highlighted as purposes for mathematics. One is to understand and critique the world, and the other is to experience wonder, joy, and beauty. And the brackets there are, of course, my additions here. One of the things that I think is great about the other two purposes, which are not as often talked about, are that students can begin to see themselves in mathematics and see how math connects to their lives now, today. One of the things that when you think about what does it mean to understand and critique the world, one of the things that's really exciting about mathematics when I teach mathematics is I like to show students that they actually have, by learning mathematics, they're gaining skills and power to understand the way things work, which is really powerful, and to actively critique what's going on, right? If you pick up your cell phone and you begin to question what's gone into making this machine and why is it so addictive and what should we be doing, thinking about algorithms, mathematics empowers us to actually understand and critique what's going on, and also to innovate. And that's something that students can begin to grasp if they also see themselves as being creators. Experiencing wonder, joy, and beauty is another aspect of mathematics that I think it would be really great if we could help students appreciate mathematics just like art, as triumphs of human achievement, human ingenuity. There's the beauty of reasoning, the thrill of understanding, and the unexpected enchantments that you often find. And this is, when I think about that op-ed, one of the reasons that I think students have a hard time doing problems is that sometimes, most of the time, problems are often unexciting and boring. What if we could design curricula where there was actually payoffs and the kinds of questions unexpected enchantments and the kinds of questions that students see? And this is, in college, this is one of the things that I often try in my classes is to try to design homeworks where they're actually exciting, right? Students who come up to me after my exams, I would love for them to be able to say, I really, and it sometimes happens, I really enjoyed that problem. Right? This is the kind of thing that I think it would be great if we could all nurture. Catalyzing change, I think, talks about building identity and agency, and this is language that was unfamiliar to me until I started working with the writing team. And I think more college professors need to begin to develop an understanding, appreciation of all the work that's out there in math education. To try to frame some of the deep issues. So mathematical identity is basically, roughly speaking, beliefs that students have about their own ability to participate and do mathematics, to see themselves as capable. Agency is the extent to which students express and engage their identities by taking risks, by engaging in productive struggle. And if you think a little bit about this, again, when you think about expanding professional opportunities and college and career ready, it's identity, agency are not as big a piece there as they are in understanding, critiquing the world, and experiencing wonder, joy, and beauty, which are both of those, I think, in much richer and fuller ways, help students begin to see themselves as capable mathematical learners. We heard a little bit about modeling in the last session. That's an excellent way for students to begin to see themselves as being able to create mathematics in the context of modeling. So I'll just say a few things good things that are happening at the college level. There's one of the things that's great is that there's more and more of an uptake in what's called active learning. I'm not sure if that's a familiar term this is a term that we use at the college level. I don't know if it's as highly used in K-12, but active learning is basically moving away from traditional lecture where there's a professor standing up at the front and only one-way transmission of information. Active learning could include lecture, but it's an interactive or engaged form of lecture. You could imagine having a classroom where every 10 minutes students are stopping to actually engage in the materials that they're learning. That's one type of active learning. Another is flipped classrooms, which I'm sure you've heard about, and also what's called inquiry-based learning, IBL, which is students actually engaged in discovery activities inside the classroom. These are becoming more and more popular, and students, it would be great for high school students coming in to begin to be familiar and comfortable with these forms of learning. There's more and more of an emphasis on modeling and statistics, and we can talk more about that in the panel discussion. Professional societies, as you've heard, are now, I think, on board with a lot of these ideas of trying to build identity and agency There's a greater awareness. I'll just mention MAA Project Next, which is a professional development program for college professors, actually now has its whole training centered around helping professors understand issues of equity, which I know at the K-12 level, now having gone to several NCTM conferences, equity is a huge part of what goes on in K-12, and it's not as huge a part of what's going on in college. So these are some of the good things that are happening. I would say that higher education needs to continue to help professors adapt to incorporate active learning. The IP guide was mentioned at the last session as a really great resource in learning how to do that. I think college professors also need to learn the language and the research and the pedagogical practices around equity. I mean, there are lots of college professors who don't even know what the term equity means. I was just recently overheard a conversation where somebody was saying, what is equity? I've never heard of that term. I think college professors need to understand the need to train in inclusive pedagogy and attend to some of these, what are often thought of as non-mathematical concerns, but I contend there really are extremely mathematical concerns. And also appreciate multiple pathways to and through mathematics. So I just mentioned at Harvey Mudd some of the ways that we've tried to adapt and build some of these things into our program are our goals. So I've just, at the bottom two slides here you can't read, but I'll just mention, you'll see as we have practice goals and content goals for our students. The very first practice goal is mathematical affection. Students appreciating the beauty, fun, power of mathematics and being able to articulate what mathematics is. You'll notice that communication is another part of our goal. Teamwork is another part. Diversity is another goal. Students should be able to work and communicate with diverse groups of people of varying abilities who come from a variety of cultures. And then we also train our students in writing mathematics well. You can see this at the top right here. One of the things we talk about when we come in, we have to teach freshmen that, yes, when you do mathematics, you write in sentences. And those sentences have verbs, and they end in periods. And students are often surprised because they're used to just turning in a bunch of equations that have no connection to one another. So this is something that I think our students, we teach our students to try to do. I'll link to this when you get the slides. These links are active, so it'll take you to our handouts on this. We also have guides that talk about collaboration. So I just have a few thoughts in terms of equipping teachers. I think one of the things that would be great is for us to focus and continue to focus on the process of doing math, not just the outcome. Elevating student thinking, making strategic choices, helping students to realize that math is a process. It's not just always about getting the answer. And this better aligns with college instruction because, when you start teaching, when I teach modeling or when I teach proofwriting, that's about process. It's not about just understanding what the answer is. And then broadening assessment to value more ways of expressing mathematical growth. It's very common, of course, for people to think speed is important. But in college mathematics, speed isn't a thing as much. And if teachers can broaden assessment to value more ways of expressing growth, I think it'll align better with college efforts to broaden math training. I'll just finish by just mentioning a personal view of mine. I think people will build math identities if they can see math as deeply tied to what it means to be a human being. I mean, if you think about anything you do in your life, you do it because you find some meaning and some purpose in it. And if math is just cold and logical and lifeless, there's no reason people would be interested or attracted to do math. And what does it mean to be human? It means to think well. It means to reason effectively. It means to care for others. It means to experience joy and wonder. And it means to build communities. So the more that we can do these kinds of things in mathematics, I think the better off our students will be. Thank you very much.
So in the meantime, and I'm from Valencia College in Orlando, and I am going to be talking about the two-year perspective. And before I do that, I am actually really interested in finding out what areas people are from in this room. So I'm curious, how many of you are in the K-12? Okay. How many of you are in the community college sectors? Okay. And how many of you are at the university system? And how many consider themselves workforce? Because I like that category this morning. Thank you, David, for that laugh this morning. Workforce. Okay. So I was interested because I wanted to know what message I was sharing with whom. So I appreciate that. And I also thought you might want to know who else is in the room as well. So real quick background, I actually was a community college student as well. So I went to Indian River Community College in Fort Pierce, Florida. I went on music scholarship and tennis scholarship. I just decided that that's what I wanted to do. I had no idea that mathematics was going to be a passion for me. I had really, really great teachers, and that is why I stand in front of you today. I had somebody that influenced me, told me that I was going to do something, I was going to make a difference, because I was tutoring my entire tennis team and the entire orchestra. And they hired me then as a tutor in the support center, and that is how I became a math major and how I ended up doing what I'm doing today. And that's also why I have this draw to the community college, and I will always be an advocate for helping students that don't know what they don't know. And it's our job to help them understand how to do that and what to do to make a difference in their lives. So my mother was an English teacher, so I rebelled. That's the other story I share. So what does it look like? So I had a really interesting experience about 2 weeks ago, a month ago. I went to the National Academies, and I was part of the planning team for that, the National Science Academies. And there was a talk that was given by Elizabeth Zachary, I forgot her last name, she got married. Anybody know it? Hold on, I have it here somewhere. Yeah, yes, thank you, Rousseau. Rousseau? Is that how you say it? Anyway, she gave this talk, and I really felt like she was saying, Julie Phelps, this is your life. It felt very much like every single thing that she talked about was part of what I have been researching over the last 10 years or doing in my classrooms. It was a part of my life, what it was that I was already doing. So it was one of those moments where every time she said something, yep, did that, oh, I remember that. Yes, we did that too. So here are the 5 types of reforms that AMATIC talks about in its document, as well as the national mathematics, so the redesign effort work that's supported by Dana Center, Carnegie, AMATIC, and NAID, and a couple other organizations, MAA as well. A couple other organizations support the National Math Summits, and we had our 3rd one this past year, and these are the different reforms that we actually found. And I have actually reorganized my report, my findings, based upon Liz Zachary's work, because I think it's a really good way for you to go out and find out exactly what we're talking about. So if you actually look at what she means when she talks about the assessment and placement reforms, it's really what we're talking about in our documents, and I think it's a nice one place where you can actually get a sense of what is meant by that. So our reforms talk about assessment, placement. We're also doing structure and sequencing of developmental education. We also talk about instruction and content, student support reforms, and comprehensive reforms in general. And it's amazing to me that so many of the things that she talks about, starting with assessment and placement, is a part of what we're doing in our world. So I am interested in saying to you that multiple measures assessment is one of the big pieces of what we're doing. Diagnostic assessment, early assessment programs at high schools, and I'm imagining that some of you are familiar with these things that are up here. She goes into her document, talks about the research behind it. It's in our impact document as well, but I felt like I gave you a link on the slide before it to her report, which it gives you a lot of information about what's researched on it. So I thought that was a nice one place recent. Assessment and placement in multiple measures, and it's interesting when you talk to people about multiple measures, I don't I feel like a lot of people are still trying to grapple with what that is, because in different states they're kind of doing different things, but it is talking about placing students into courses using multiple ideas, having conversations with students. And then we also have diagnostic assessments, which are kind of like computer-based type assessments. And then we also have the early programs assessments where we go into the schools. We also talk about sequencing. So the mathematics boot camp is something I actually did at my institution. It's amazing that every single one of these, the state of Florida back in 2014 had us redesign our entire developmental math pathways, our entire math pathways, in like 3 months. At least we had more than 4 days. I think somebody in the other panel said they had 4 days to make it. Yeah, okay, so we did it in 3 months. But imagine trying to change an entire state. In a college the size of Valencia, we have 75,000 students that attend our college, and it is ridiculously hard to make a change that is good and substantial that will mean something for students. So we did quite a few of these things. Co-requisite model 2, when you look at that, I am amazed how many times I'll speak to people in my own sector where I'll say, oh, you're doing the co-requisite model, and they'll go, okay, what version of it? What does that mean? So language matters, and I like the fact that there's this one report that was done recently where Liz took the time and really dug into it and looked at all of the different ones and then looked at the research studies on it, and I think that's worthwhile as you continue working. And there's overlap too. Obviously, when you're changing the structure and sequencing, it's going to affect other parts. So we also talked about reforms to instruction and content, and I have to say that one of my most professionally enriching experiences took place about 15 years ago, and this is kind of what revived me to working with others at the college, because if you think about it, teaching is a very lonely job. We have our classes, it's our students, we have our experiences, but we're not really connected to other faculty and the experiences that we're having. So when I did learning communities, I did a learning community with a student success professor. And it was really cool because she was involved in the learning of mathematics. I was involved in helping students pick career choices and talk about their future and things that I had never really given much thought to. And it was hugely impactful on my own development as a faculty member at my institution and my work with students in the future going forward. So I've really enjoyed that, and I learned a lot from it. And a lot of things that we did in the learning communities do seem to be impacting us as we move down the line. Self-paced modularization was quite a movement. That's all I'm going to say about that. And then we have multiple math pathways, and this is also something that the state of Florida did. We had to redesign our pathways, and yes, there is STEM and there's non-STEM. We still have that misunderstanding about what college algebra actually is, what intermediate algebra actually is, and is intermediate algebra actually a detriment to our students' success in class? We have a lot of interesting things, so we have talked about what does pathways actually look like. And we have, and there's a lot of organizations that have done STEM and non-STEM pathways, and I think it's worth looking into and exploring as you do this. The high quality, active, and contextualized instruction are all there together, and it didn't occur, I taught high school for 3 years before I went back and got my master's and then started at teaching college. And I felt like I was doing active learning as very much a part of what I was doing. I mean, I was having students build bridges in my classes, and I was doing things that I don't have time for, I thought, at the community college level. So I feel like what we might see as active learning is it's an amazing thing to watch. I also had them doing a parabolic function, and I had them, if they did the math right, they could tell me where to stand and hit me with a water balloon. That was great. I have to tell you, my seniors that year, it was senioritis, and I think it was 30 days to graduation. I had every single senior show up to class to participate in this activity. So yeah, they told me where to stand mathematically, and I had them shooting water balloons at me, and it was wonderful. That's like the active learning or engaged learning that I'm talking about, and I still think that I made it fun. all of a sudden they cared, and it was funny because students wanted to leave other classes and come out and watch them launch water balloons at me, and I thought, this is crazy. Somebody needs to give me like an armor or something. Okay, so student support reforms. This was interesting too. Student success course I mentioned, tutoring services, supplemental instruction, intensive advising, whole different area at our colleges, right? We see at my institution, there is student services and then there's academics. You know, we got the whole two different, there's like the pillars almost, like there's this work and then there's that work. We're watching things merge a lot more now. We're actually talking across fields and we're actually talking about what needs to be done. Tutoring services is different than supplemental instruction, and supplemental instruction doesn't necessarily mean the same thing at any institution. Just gonna say that out loud right now. That was actually my research for my doctoral work, and it is not the same at all. Community college, supplemental instruction, and university supplemental instruction, not even close to the same things, and also everything's different. So while these are mentioned, there's a lot of things that are different. Intensive advising, I have also heard it called intrusive advising. I've heard a lot of different words. So this is also an interesting thing where we're talking about career choices, the things that I mentioned earlier. So student support reforms are also being talked about. One of the things that I want to end with is this idea of all of these things that have been done over the past 10 years. What is working is a combination of all of them. So here we are with the comprehensive reforms, and there's actually a movement in the community college sector called the Guided Pathways. If you look at that, that is a hyperlink. You can go out to it and understand more about that project, but it is really setting up a map for completion. At my college, we actually have something called Life Map. It is like something that they have to fill out when they first come into our institution. They have to have a plan towards graduation, where they're going, their career goals, everything like that. And that's built into the process. Accelerating progression through math classes. So as I think was mentioned, we have a problem with getting students to and through. Well, is that really the problem, or is it really the course curriculum? There's quite a few things in there. So we've got to talk about how to embed early alert. And then we also need learning outcomes better defined. And I want to leave you with this one thing that I will say to my students when they start telling me they are having problems or they never understood math, or there's a lot of this feedback that I get from students, particularly in my first level, in that entry course, whether it's college algebra, college math, which I talked about in the last section. Even my calculus students, I will have students that will say to me, my mom wasn't good at math, my dad wasn't good at math, so I'm not going to be good at math. So I often get that. And I have a poem that I learned when I was in the 5th grade that I will say to them. If you think you're beaten, you are. If you think you dare not, you don't. If you'd like to win, but think you can't, it's almost a cinch you won't. If you think you'll lose, you've lost, for out in the world you'll find. Success begins with a fellow's will, it's all in the state of mind. Life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but sooner or later, the man who wins is the fellow who thinks he can. That's my message, and I'm passing it on.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Hey, good morning, everyone. Hey, with enthusiasm now. Good morning, everyone. Okay, that's great. Glad to be here and to be a part of this conversation. To me, this is a really exciting moment, just to see so many areas of work starting to converge at so many different levels in so many different arenas. May it happen. Let's make it happen, folks. So I'm here to talk about math teacher education preparation. And you heard a little bit from Mike Steele earlier, but you may be wondering, what are we doing here? This is about K-12 to higher ed. And so my argument is that math teacher preparation is a really critical piece of the landscape. So for this to work at the K-12 side, we need to have good teachers, okay? We're giving you those teachers. from the teacher preparation programs. If we're giving you people who are inept, good luck. On the other hand, the teachers the students we get to prepare to be teachers are a result of that pipeline. And when we're letting them down and the students are not being successful, we don't have much to pick from. As Mike mentioned, it's that building the pipeline much earlier of students coming into teaching as a career. So I think we're a very integral part of the situation. The problem, which I'm not going to go into in any depth, is just that we don't have enough really well-prepared teachers coming out of the teacher preparation pipeline. A key factor in that is the quality of the preparation they have. Is even if they come out, are they going to stay? If they're not well prepared, if they blaze out in their first year or two, it's refilling the leaky bucket that Ingersoll has talked about, right? Is as many are leaving and we're trying to fill up the bucket and they're all leaking out the bottom. So there's a really big issue in teacher preparation. So I'm going to speak a little bit on some of the work from the Math Teacher Education Partnership. That's the framing for the work. I'm not here to promote that, well, a little bit to promote that, but mainly just to give you a sense of the landscape of teacher preparation. And this is just a group that was convened by the APLU, and it's very much aligned with the standards that Mike Steele talked about earlier. Through the Math Teacher Education Partnership, we've identified 4 major challenges. One is, well, I'm going to talk about them each in time. I won't list them now, but you'll see them in a moment. Okay, there they are. The first one is a common vision. So I think this is at the core of a lot of the issues that we're facing. Everyone needs to be on the same page. If we are teaching our methods courses and we promote this idea that students should be engaged in their learning and we should really be attentive to equity, and they never see that at all in the math courses they've taken at the university, there's a message that's being sent. If they go out and do their field experiences and their mentor teachers say, those guys in the ivory tower, just ignore them. Here, in the real world, here's what we do. Worksheet, worksheet, worksheet. Okay? And is the broader policy arena aligned with all of this? We have to be on the same page. We have to stop undercutting each other. And we have to find ways of working together towards a common aim. So this is an overarching challenge, I think, for math teacher preparation, but I think for all of us. How do we really get on the same page and work together in a cohesive manner? The second challenge is in clinical experiences. We need the effective mentors who are really walking the walk. We need to have the relationships with the schools, again, going back to the mixed messages, so that mentor teachers are being chosen on the basis of their instructional knowledge, their commitment, and not on seniority and other things. And we're also developing some new models for clinical experiences, for example, paired placement for the student teaching experience, which is a real game changer. If I had 20 minutes, I would do 2 minutes on that, but I don't. But there's a lot going on there. There are really a lot of challenges, and there are some solutions emerging as well. The third challenge is in mathematics content preparation. Again, they need to be seeing good instruction in their mathematics courses, particularly early on in the calculus to calculus sequence. First of all, if they're not doing well in those courses, they're going to quit along with all the other STEM majors. Okay? This isn't just a math teacher education issue, it's an everybody issue, is we're driving too many students out. And so we need them to be having positive experiences so maybe they can actually make it into the field. The second is, again, they need to be experiencing pedagogy that's in line with what we want them to be doing with their students. This is just like, you know, the message that someone referred to earlier. When all they see is stand and deliver at the college level, they go and, you know, it's like as a high school teacher, it's like, well, that's what they think is good. And so what are we likely to get? We also need to pay more attention in the green bubble to candidates' content knowledge for teaching. Just doing a math major is not equivalent to having the mathematical knowledge you need to teach. There's some particular things that need to happen. Okay, I'm leaving that one hang there for a moment. Okay, finally is in the whole area of recruitment and retention. Okay, we have to bring them into the pathway that might lead to mathematics teaching as a profession. Getting them in requires some collaboration, folks. We need K-12 teachers to stop telling their kids, you can do better than being a teacher. Please, stop it. Okay? Why would you want to be a teacher? Okay, I feel where that's coming from, but I hear those reports all the time. And that, to me, that's sad. Teachers who don't believe in their own profession. It breaks my heart. There's a big problem here. We need to get past mathematicians who say, oh, you're very talented in math. Well, you should certainly not be a teacher. You're too smart to be a teacher. Okay? So we need to start seeing mathematics teaching as an exciting, valuable, rewarding profession. I've been in it for several years, decades by now, 40 years actually, and I've loved every minute of it. It's been fabulous. And I want other people to have that same sense of this is so much fun. Why wouldn't we want other people to be having fun? Okay, we get them in the program. They have to actually make it through the program. We have to give them the support so that they don't just sort of flare out in the Intro to Proofs class. So some of that is good instruction, but some of that is also good advising, which is, again, similar to what Julie was talking about. And then here's the real kicker, is so they graduate, but what are we doing to really support them as they enter the profession so that they'll do more than a year or two? That's becoming normative, the 2 to 3 years, and they flare out then. They work so hard to get there, and they just give up on it. Okay, we need to be building support systems. And again, this is something that goes across stakeholder groups. I jokingly say, from the higher ed point of view, our idea of support for them as they begin their careers is to give them a hearty handshake as they cross the stage and a sincere invitation to send us a postcard when they get there, wherever that may be. And so we're not really engaging them beyond the moment of graduation. So this, in fact, is the driver diagram from the MTE partnership. We have research groups that are working on each of these problems. And again, I think a key word is partnership. This is not an organization of math teacher educators. It includes mathematicians and K-12 folks as well. We need to intentionally be working across sectors. We cannot live in our silos. It is not going to work. And just a quick mention that equity and social justice infuses all of this. And for more information, I'm going to end with this, is I think that from your state team point of view, okay, this may sound kind of self-serving, but it's true. Mathematics teacher educators can be a really valuable resource to your state team. If you don't have math teacher educators involved, really think about that. Here's why, is we are naturally boundary crossers. We live in the K-12 world. We have to. We have students out in the schools. We're working with the schools to prepare teachers for them. But we also live in higher ed. We're working with mathematics departments to prepare our students. So we kind of walk across both worlds. I feel equally comfortable sitting in a math department meeting at the university and in a high school. So math teacher educators can be a valuable resource. With that, I will end almost on time.
Well, it's always a problem to come last, and everything you were really going to talk about's already been said. But I will be providing, I hope, a little more context, because in my view, some of what we've talked about, well, all of what we talked about, in fact, people have mentioned the challenge of what is the language? What are we talking about? Are we using a common language? And I think that's part of what we have to talk about if we're talking about aligning strategies. So the MAA Instructional Practices Guide has been mentioned a couple of times today. And we talk about one of the lead statements is that effective teaching and deep learning requires student engagement with content both inside and outside the classroom. Now, student engagement and active learning, those are terms that I think mean different things to different people. One of the first things my undergraduate advisor said to me was that you learn mathematics through your fingers and not your eyes and ears. Now, he had one particular kind of learning in mind, perhaps, right? He didn't necessarily wasn't necessarily thinking about my cognitive development. He might have been just thinking about automaticity. Maybe I could do trig substitution learn that, and somehow that would be a good skill to have. So I want to back up a little bit this morning. In fact, I'm going to go way back and talk a little bit about where our ideas around education come from, or some of the practices in education. All of us have heard of behavioral psychology. In 1913, John Watson wrote, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant, chief, and yes, even beggarman and thief, regardless of his talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestry." That's a little strange to me. But behavioral psychology dominated through the middle of the century. If you go back and you look up B.F. Skinner's teaching machine that he developed in 1957, based on his experiments with rats in the lab at Harvard, he thought that we could also automate education. Now, I won't make any direct criticisms of any current systems, but I think there are a lot of pushes to automate education now, too, that we might be a little wary of. Panaceas such as that aren't likely to happen. Now, that kind of training, however, Francis mentioned, that we have students who are perfectly willing to practice football or basketball or music, and they have an immediate payoff, or they see an immediate connection between the world or their ultimate goals, and that's true. But those goals have a much more physical component than what we're trying to accomplish in mathematics. We have all, since really the early 60s, when even going back further, we have exercises in our math books, right? You have exercises. You're supposed to do these things. That language is built on an analogy between physical development of muscular skills, and the development of the brain, which we now know is false. That analogy doesn't hold up. The human brain does not conceptually grow through repetition. Now, we might, in fact, want to use repeated kinds of drills if we're just looking for automaticity of certain kinds of very specific processes, but if we're going to do that, we should be very clear on what those processes are that we care about that should be automatic, and recognize that that's not really pushing the cognitive development of our students the way we want to, and the way that what we've learned about the human brain tells us. So I want to point to this document because the IP guide doesn't just say active learning and leave it at that. It talks a lot about what that means in different contexts. It talks about building classroom communities, and ultimately the recognition that education, human development, is a human process and requires relationship. In the Conference Board of Math Science, CBMS, in our 2016 statement, echoed some of what's in the IP guide. Actually, it preceded it in terms of its release. It was under development at the time. And again, emphasizes the feedback, the interaction between experts and their peers as being important elements of what active learning is all about. And I want to emphasize that I think active learning is a term that is not universally understood in the same way, and that needs to be part of the dialogue. Oh, I meant to say when I talked about Skinner's work, I want to point out that, there are a lot of people who still think the educational system that was built in that time, in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, was very effective, and I would like to argue that in fact it was, if part of being effective means that it's meant to reinforce existing social structures and norms. Remember that at that time only white males essentially were going to college. That was the bulk of who was going to college. And we were talking about a very hierarchical society, and higher education was very much a part of maintaining that hierarchical structure. In fact, our educational structures in this country were very much ingrained in that system and part of reinforcing that system. And I think that's another piece that the IEP guide speaks strongly to, and that CBMS speaks to through our organizational efforts, is that we need to question what the existing structures are if we're going to move forward as a society. Amatic impact. We've heard already about that report, but I want to point out the consistency. This also goes back and is reflected a bit in the Common Vision report that you've heard mentioned, that was a project that MAA led, but it included representatives from the American Mathematical Society, the Society for Industrial Applied Mathematics, the American Statistical Association, and AMATIC. All of us, I'm going to say the whole word, the American Mathematical Association for two-year colleges, since I said all the others. Of two-year colleges. That's right. Sorry. Okay. Again, a similar sort of theme here, and I think one of the points, the main point that I was asked to make, I think, when I was asked to be on this panel, was that the kinds of discussions around instructional strategies and the ways in which we engage and support our students in higher education are beginning to align more with research on teaching and learning, and being more responsive to the kinds of activities that our partners in the K-12 classrooms have wanted to engage in, and in many cases do engage in, and recognizing, more importantly, the kinds of engagement we have to have on a human level, and I think all of you who are in K-12 classrooms on a regular basis know that the human interaction and understanding your students as human beings is an essential element of bringing them forward intellectually. So I want to say that this also aligns with NCTM recommendations. Similar statements. Aligns with the Common Core standards for mathematical practice. Regardless of what your state's doing with respect to Common Core, I think the discussions that were had in the development of Common Core around content and process standards and the interplay between those two have helped drive the conversation forward across the sectors. So I think it's been an important part of the conversation. There's alignment, beginning to be alignment across institutions. The American Association of Universities, which is a collective, an organization of, I think it's about 70 R1 institutions across the country, has been since 2011 been involved in what's called the Undergraduate STEM Education Initiative. And it is, again, designed to push out research-based practices to institutions across all STEM disciplines. So across institutions and across disciplines, these practices and these attitudes around education, just the willingness to discuss our educational practices and recognize the need for change is happening across institutions. The American Association of Colleges and Universities, ACU, the high impact educational practices reflect similar things. The work of TIPSY, transforming post-secondary education in mathematics, similar ideas. So these kinds of conversations, what I want to say is that they're beginning to resonate and pick up steam, and we, as disciplinary societies, all of the CBMS member societies and even more, are beginning to collectively have these discussions and publicly push out high-quality information around this. It doesn't mean that there's full consensus, not uniformity. Uri has pointed to the fact that we need coherence, not uniformity. And that's, I think, what the disciplinary societies and CBMS, we're all trying to push towards that vision of the future. So thank you. Oh, wait, one more slide. Since we're talking about CBMS, I got to give David Brasou a shout out. The characteristics of successful programs in college calculus and progress through calculus projects really began to move the MAA forward on this front. When we first started this project began before I was executive director. David and I wrote the original proposal for projects through for the characteristics of successful programs. And it was driven by some of the results in behavioral economics and the ideas there that organizational structure and the ways in which individual actors perceive what are the norms for their profession and for their behavior affect their behavior. And so I think this was, well, that's where the word nudge comes from here. So anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, we have some time for discussion and questions, and happy to take some from the floor. Yes.
So it's certainly the case that there's lots of good things happening in each of the associations in K-12 and higher. When we come here to discuss a specific problem, we have the barrier between 12 and 13 is a burial ground for too many students. We have students taking calculus in high school who retake it in college. We have students retaking the same courses that don't work. The question is, and I think you would really get it, some of this is about policy, things we can't directly affect. But one of the things we can most directly affect in our associations that would smooth the transition of students, how can we be helpful to this public policy problem?
So I think I mentioned Common Vision, which was a cross-society effort to see what we agreed on, which we found out there's a lot. And it required communication. And I think what we can do and should do, and we're already looking for ways to do this, is establish ongoing channels of communication that allow these discussions and these robust dialogues around what it is we're even talking about in some cases. As I said, can we establish even some common understanding across what we mean when we talk about active learning, about math modeling, whatever it is. And I think those discussions are important. And I think the second level is that we have to make those discussions and those collaborations visible to the policymakers and the other decision makers across districts, states, and so forth. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. But it has to be more than just putting stuff on the website or drafting a report and hoping that somebody will read it. It's got to be about outreach. And that's one of the things I'm interested in following up here once this, as this process unfolds over the next 18 months before all you teams come back, is to find out who are the people in your states that it might matter to if we reached out and said to them, hey, we want to commend your state for participating in this conversation. Here's what it can ultimately deliver. Here's why it's important for you to be involved in this. And so that we increase the credibility of these efforts. And I think that's important for us, for me at the MAA, is to work to improve the credibility of mathematics and mathematicians to make our professional lives more productive and better.
Let me just add on to that, is when Common Vision came out, I was ecstatic. I thought, this is great. We set up a seminar with different folks, including the math department, and we were going to have this great discussion on the Common Vision, on the Common Vision. Let's just say the conversation did not go the way I expected. I was expecting that there would be a lot of excitement, and people would say, wow, this is really a fabulous opportunity for us to rethink what we're doing. What was I even thinking? That's not how it went at all. It was mainly explaining to me why all of that was irrelevant to the context in our university, why things couldn't be done. Okay? So I think part of it is MAA, AMS can say whatever they want to say, but how do we get that down to the frontline faculty and have it impact their lives? How can we message things so that it didn't become me like trying to argue with them? I have to admit, it did almost degenerate to that. I needed better ways of talking about things with them, with my colleagues in mathematics, so they really saw what's in it for me. Because, is this going to help me get my next paper in my research area published? Probably not. How can we sell this as an important part of the academic mission of mathematics departments? I don't know. It's very quiet in here. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? We have to get past this sort of, those are nice things to say, but no one is ever going to do this.
And I would add to that just real quickly, that part of our work, part of the work of the Progress Through Calculus project, and part of the work that others are doing is to have demonstrations where people have done the work and show that it can succeed. And then those kinds of arguments are ultimate. We have to undercut those arguments through specific examples. That takes leadership, and thankfully we have some leaders in the community that show that.
I think one thing that I just came to mind is we have a lot of, I think professional societies could try to pay more attention to adjuncts and mentoring the contingent faculty. Oh, yeah. Any other questions? Yes. Jim. And then in the back.
Listening to Yuri is always great fun because they always have so much data that's interesting. But when you make a statement that you have this number of people taking calculus in high school and retaking it in college, is there a hidden statement that we don't want to permit that to happen? Students overwhelmingly take chemistry in high school and then take chemistry again. They take physics in high school and they take physics again. But somehow, much like modern languages, we have an order, and so we have a belief that people are supposed to stay step by step on the same track. And for this initiative to work, we actually have to have a set of beliefs of what change we want.
I see these opportunities for discussion, these places where people are making courses do the same thing.
Okay, can you speak so we can all hear?
I think that these places are special opportunities for collaboration. People teaching courses with the same name. Right? It creates a space where the sectors can coordinate and make their work more efficient. I'm not opposed to people taking
I'll give you a couple of examples of
It's on now.
In my state, a student who takes calculus in high school and comes to the university where I work, speaks with an advisor, and willingly starts in second semester calculus, third semester calculus, or differential equations, gets all of the college credit for the courses that they skipped in the calculus sequence without having taken an AP test. We give out copies of our final exam and the book that we use so that the high schools know exactly the standards we're trying to ask. So we've actually been doing some of these things for over 20 years.
So I think we're a victim of our environment. I liken our educational system to the industrial age. I feel like we have all this raw material coming in, and we're trying to put them on a conveyor belt of progress, and we're trying to give them all the same treatments, and we're expecting, we have this waste that is dropping off of it. I actually see that as kind of what we are actually doing. And it does need to be re-envisioned and reimagined, and I think that the help of the societies will definitely assist. And the message has got to be clear, and we've got to talk about what it is that actually students need. Because I think the industrial age of how our system was designed is part of our problem. We are stuck in this conveyor belt world where we are giving these treatments, and that's just kind of how it is, and it's not how it should be. I feel like we need to, as we're sitting at our state tables, we should be asking questions like, if we were kings and queens of the universe, what is it that we would want to happen, and what do we want education to look like in our state? How do we re-envision this and really get away from that I don't want to call it cookie cutter. It's industrial age. It's the factory work style that we have been doing our education as for years. And that's how I see it anyway.
There's a question in the back, and then we'll come to you. Okay.
Rudi Seiler. I'm from Berlin and, of course, an outsider. So I have just a few questions, and I would like to address what you were saying, Till. I think the problem of students coming to college and have not really fundamentally understood the concepts might have to do with some roadblocks which one has to remove. And one of the first question I have is, how much is the influence of high tuition and expenses for books a roadblock by the mechanism that some students have to work and cannot fully concentrate on their studies? That is the first question. And the second question is, the motivation of students seems to be a universal problem in mathematics teaching. Now, we have heard about very interesting problems and projects, and is there in the United States some kind of a place, a database where you have open resource problems where everybody has access? And if it is there also a quality assurance of such problems, which of course is always the problem for open resource? It should be high quality. So, okay, those are my problems as a foreigner.
There are some movements to create open source books and math and some infrastructure that's now being developed. I don't remember what it's called. Is it Math Books or XML, Math XML or something like that, which allow people to actually have smartphone compatible books. And you can go to Rob Beezer's webpage at, I think it's University of Puget Sound, maybe? Does that sound right? Yeah,
I know that.
and find out more about that.
I was thinking more about problems, very high quality problems.
Don't have a good answer for that. At the K through 12 level, many of you know about art of problem solving, although that's not necessarily open. Or is some of that open source?
Oh, most of it.
Most of it is. Yeah. Okay.
Well, a lot.
Yeah.
So there's the question of what role these societies play on the shaping curriculum. Actually, the most influential people in the country are also at this meeting. The people who run Student Achievement Partners, who are closely connected to Ed Reports. They've become more important than the professional societies, actually, in shaping the actual textbook production industry. And one of the things we can do, which is actually happening at this meeting for the first time, is those nonprofit groups supported by philanthropy are actually here reaching out to the professional societies because they recognize that this is sort of a cusp point. The standards movement is winding down and everyone is wondering what's next and seeing opportunity. I think what Gary said, professional societies can shape the culture of the profession. Right? Cultures are structures, routines, and rituals. And when you, Francis, point out that kids don't feel excitement, part of that is cultural. If you're in a physics class, physicists love to tell students things that are probably not going to be true. They're constantly, you go to a physics class, they're constantly talking about the frontiers. We culturally do not tell students anything, no matter how beautiful, unless they've had the material to prove it. So we have the power to establish new rituals, new norms of behavior. Now, we're not the only force on this, but I think we have to map out the problems to smooth the transition, because now people need some college to be upwardly mobile. And math is more important than it ever was for upward mobility. So equity and upward mobility are connected. But I think we have to say, which rituals, which norms of responsible behavior can we affect? And then we need to figure out exactly how to build the influence, prioritize things to shape that. The business of databases, that has never worked in our country. It's sort of creative, the companies have sort of capitalized that, And we have gotten pretty good. These other groups, like Student Achievement Partners, have had a lot of influence in shaping them. And I think we can learn something, and by partnering with them, we can have influence on better quality products. I just think we have to play our role, and we have to coordinate our role with other people who have had.
Is there a question in the back corner, far back? I think you had your hand up.
So I want to go back to the changing of the structures conversation. I really need this? Okay. Oh, sorry. And part of what we just recently experienced at I'm from University of Wisconsin System Administration. On our campuses were different pathways that math educators or chemistry educators could go through the promotion and tenure process. Which I see the eyebrows going up because that's it was novel to say the least. And it took a lot of work across the campus to be able to have somebody in chemistry education who is in the chemistry department go up in the division of professions which was where education professors are promoted with tenure, and be fully recognized in that department. And it was this kind of waffling back and forth and jumping of hoops in that, but ultimately the department came to recognize the value of future chemistry educators, and the argument was made at that department to move her forward to a different division. It's just something to think about when we think about ways of jumping through structures or trying to alter them.
That's a great point.
Jen, did you want to
Or are there some questions from this side of the audience? Just want to make sure that raise your hand and let me see, and then we'll come to you.
He's been waiting a little bit, so I'm going to let him go, and then you're next. How's that?
Thank you. My question is really just based out of personal curiosity. What does active learning look like in an intro calculus course with over 100 students in it?
Go ahead.
Please. No, please. I was going to say, other people may speak to this better, but I work with a project that's promoting active learning in pre-calculus through calculus 2. And a lot of it initially, it seems like, focuses on if there's a recitation in the large lecture courses. That's sort of the easy entry. So rather than just going over homework solutions, actually doing mathematics in those recitation courses. And eventually there are ways of incorporating active learning into large lecture. It requires some creativity. I did not believe it for a while, but I've seen it happen. Everyone turn and talk to the people around you. In a room, large lecture room with fixed seats, that may not be the easiest thing to do, but it can be done. And I think increasingly universities are building spaces that really are supportive of active learning. The classroom itself is set up in that way. I know at University of Nebraska, they've been very aggressive in building spaces that will support that kind of interaction.
So having worked on the instructional practices guide, I know there are examples of large lecture sections in calculus, so that might be a good resource to look at to get some examples on what it looks like from the faculty that are in that environment. And up here.
And there's also a recent book out, which is actually open source, Active Calculus, which you might want to take a look at, by Matt Bolkins.
So my question is maybe a follow-up from Jim's comment about the support that they're bringing to their students who maybe are ready for a Calc 2 course. So as we in Oklahoma talk about some of the issues about the slowdown of repeating calculus 2, 3, or 4 times, oftentimes the response that I get from the K-12 kind of policy community is that sounds like a higher ed problem. Why is higher ed having them repeat these courses time and again? And so that's kind of one path of my question, but I feel like the second path is really how do we work with higher ed and find allies in the work? because I think as K-12 folks, we feel, well, I'll say when we did standards revision in Oklahoma, essentially the only public comment we got from mathematicians were just critical comments, not even people from Oklahoma, right? I mean, you guys know the process. They're just random mathematicians out there in the world who tell us what we got wrong. Nobody said that we care about active learning in the higher ed space. That was not a conversation. All we heard, all the politicians heard, other policy folks ever heard from math people was this, it's a fact-based domain. So I feel like there are these kind of two spaces where I don't think that we currently, and I certainly can't convince people in my space, that we have allies. All we hear is that they're repeating the courses, or that math is something that we're not even touching. So I just wonder, and then obviously that doesn't jive with everything you just have presented to us today, which is beautiful. So I just want to know, what else do we need to be doing? Like, how do I get the people in the K-12 space to kind of believe in the higher ed work?
So first I want to say, because I'm up here too, how awesome is it that we are in a safe space where we can say what you just said? I feel the exact same way from being in the community college sector, that the things that we do in the community college sector, we often say, well, it's not going to matter once they get to university because they aren't going to change it at the university. So we're having these conversations across spaces, and I think that this is great to have these real, these rich, these vital conversations, and it's important that, yes, we might be the choir, but we're the choir that can get things done, and boy, we might be the best choir in the world. So I think it's amazing that that statement was made, and I think it's wonderful that we can move forward from here and figure out and solve together and get the allies that are necessary across the sectors.
But we need to give them an answer.
I was just gonna, first of all, I think you're right, totally right. I think often the loudest voices in these kinds of conversations are the can I say this on camera? Crusty professors who've been teaching math a certain way, and they have a very strong vision about math being done the way it's always been done. And then the people who actually might be your allies are often people who don't have as loud voices. They're busy because they're actually engaging their students in meaningful activities, and they don't have time. So I guess I would suggest active outreach, looking for professors who are, you can often tell a lot by what's on their webpage, whether they care about equity, whether they care about high quality teaching, and I would reach out to them and help them see that you are the state leaders in your area, and that who wouldn't want to be involved if you really care about these issues with somebody who has power to change the way education's done in their states. These people are often overworked, but if you reach out to them, I think you would be able to find them.
Can I follow up on that too? I would say, because as Francis said, that requires you to reach out and figure out who's going on. So one of the things I'm thinking about from MAA's point of view that now will build on the fact that we've done this work internally to develop our new curriculum guidelines, the IP guide, so much work that's been done over the last few years, is to establish because we have 29 sections that cover the entire United States and Canada, to develop locally the capacity to engage and to find out what the right connectors are between higher ed and K-12 through our regional structure, so that you don't have to say, oh gosh, who do I call today, right? So that there's a natural way. I mean, I know people in Oklahoma that are open to that. So anyway, I think there's work to be done, but I think we're at a place where that work can start happening.
I want to mention another thing, that often professors who are at colleges that care about teaching are professionally rewarded for doing work in outreach in ways that professors at large universities are not necessarily rewarded. So they could be more welcoming.
But yet I think a lot of times the voices that tend to be heard are the ones at the research institutions, anyway. But I think I see this as a great opportunity to develop our fighting force to really find those natural allies. And I think some of it is surfacing those voices, those natural allies that we have who aren't being heard, and making sure they are being heard as kind of a counter narrative to what's going on. I think we really have to be as state teams, we have to be very purposeful in building out that kind of awareness infrastructure.
I think we have to go much further than that. I hinted at this last night. We are starting to, the reason, first of all, math is important. We're in a democracy. It's good that people are out there expressing strong opinions about our field and expressing different points of view. What's missing is a high-level, authoritative, deliberative body that's trying to build consensus, that systematically looks at those differences and tries to clarify them. So if you have, Joe Schmuck going out there and just saying, they need to do this, we have to expect that is going to happen. We're not going to be able to prevent that from happening. But if that happens, you need to be able to point local policymakers to people of the National Academy stature, Fields Medal winners, not amateurs, who have a structure for talking about standards and quality, where there are documents, there's research, and a place for constructive disagreement. We're not going to counter people who are out to trash math education, because sometimes it's not even about the standards, it's about the whole commitment to public education. By having counter people argue the other point of view, the answer is to create a responsible professional structure for deliberation. And we are getting close to that. Common vision, those documents are part of building that infrastructure. And we can't leave you guys out there hanging. If we do that, we've betrayed our leadership roles. The societies have betrayed their leadership roles. So this is about structure building. And again, not to reach the perfect standard, but high quality deliberation. And again, the theme in this country, coherence but not uniformity.
Other questions? There's one over here.
I just wanted to say in response to that, I see it as an interplay between the two. You need those strong local voices who then can invoke that broader context. So it's not an either or, it's a both and.
I accept that as a friendly amendment.
Yes, which is what it was meant as.
Actually, I just wanted to follow up that, so I work at an R1 institution as a lecturer faculty, a teaching faculty, and not a research faculty. And these professor of practice kind of positions are becoming more and more common across the country, and that is also a really good entry point. Sometimes we forget that, and I think this population is actually going to grow in the next 10 to 20 years. But there are people within math departments at R1 institutions whose sole purpose is to focus on teaching, and they're the people who are reading all this research and going to these conferences. And they also know who in their department could be current or future allies among the tenure line faculty. So I think those are really good entry point people if you're looking for local contacts.
I don't have to go far if I give it to you.
So as a corollary to Levi's question, we've noticed that there's circumstances in which college professors and educators in general offer feedback to the K-12 space because students are coming unprepared for their courses. And so then we get these, whether it's calculus or chemistry or physics, we have these circumstances where the higher ed educators are suggesting that the students need to take the course again because they're not prepared for it to begin with. And so this is oftentimes, in circumstances within my state in Utah, blamed on the idea that K-12 educators are not using assessments to pass students on, but it's this kind of effort circumstance, right? That if in circumstances at the kind of periphery of this kind of paradigm is the students that get 50% of their credit for a course, on the last day of the course by turning in all the homework. And so they haven't shown that they have the knowledge necessary to move on to the next course. They just get credit in this way. And so there's been anecdotal evidence in the last few years with some school districts that are pursuing standards-based grading. And there has also been anecdotal evidence from the college level that suggests students in those courses are better prepared to be successful in the subsequent course rather than having to retake that course again, better aligning kind of K-12 expectations with what higher ed is thinking. And I'd be interested in comments related to whether or not this is a norm that you've seen in other places, or if there's kind of case studies or pilots that have shown promise in that space.
I'm getting my steps in.
A comment related to the Oklahoma situation. I don't think we really understand what it means to partner with someone different from yourself. The recent National Academy report on graduate STEM education had a 17-member committee. It claimed to have the most diverse committee it had ever had, young people, people of color. I asked them, how many mathematicians? None. There was no space for a mathematician. I happened to have been on Clinton's ill-fated National Voluntary 8th grade math test. There was going to be a follow-up committee. They asked Roger Howe and me to be on it. We said, can you put a third mathematician? No, we don't have that much room for that. I was put on a committee by the governor of my state for in essence, reform of K-12 education. I was the representative of higher education on a 12-15 member committee. When I put together the group that did the math education of teachers that was being given away free out there, although the goal was to talk to math departments, half the people were math educators and 3/4 of the people were members of AMTE. That we really put together a cross-disciplinary group to try to achieve our task. But I think it's rare for people to genuinely embrace serious engagement of the other people.
That's a great point. Did anybody want to pick up and answer your question? I didn't have anything that I felt I could say.
Is that an answer to his question, or is that a question? Okay. Because there is one. I'm looking at our time.
Yeah, we have basically 1 minute.
One of the biggest learning experiences for any teacher at any level can be to get students that they've had before in a subsequent class, and to really, classes I've taught brilliantly, and then get the students in the next class and realize they actually didn't learn the things. Well, they didn't retain. That is the things that we taught them. So it's something to watch for, and something to, and also it helps. There was a report some number of years ago when a university faculty member was complaining about the way his daughter was taught chemistry or math out in the high school, went to the high school and found it was one of his former students. Right, so teaching the class. So those kinds of connections, I think, can be really helpful for addressing what it is you're talking about.
Okay, I think we're out of time, but we encourage you to continue these conversations, certainly with your team, but just to pick up on Jim's point, it would also be great if you were connected with somebody who's in a different role than you from another team, and try to engage, figure out how to communicate across boundaries. Thank you very much for coming, and let's thank our panelists one last time.